Now clicking the record button.
Oh,
So that
no.
way, so you're all on air. Ann Wiley's joining us. Hello, Ann Wiley.
There she is.
Hello.
Hello, and how are you now? You
Doing well. Doing well.
survived.
Yes, we've all survived so far.
I guess so. This is any emerging technology.
I think so. I mean, I don't think it was specific. I saw just emerging technologies. So, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if that means cryptocurrency or is solely cryptocurrency.
I think it means
leaves it up to
whatever
you.
we want to learn about. So if someone says, "Oh, I think the new technology is DITA." Who knows about DITA? And then people start talking about DITA, if that's the emerging technology. Or maybe you've got a new tool that you're using, like, "Oh, oxygen is much better than X metal, and here's why." That kind of thing. That's what I took it to be, but
Okay.
I also didn't read anything. I just signed up.
Just take my money.
And I was just trying to make sure I wasn't in the same room with the other two people who were here from Rochester. And I guess Lori's kind of disappeared from the scene, which doesn't surprise me. So I picked this. I
Well, the
think Tim was right
discussions are
about how
also
this
going to be
is.
harder to listen to later because
Yeah, I
you
agree.
can't participate later. So, yeah, I mean, what does everybody feel? I'm actually interested, what is everybody's take on emerging TechCom technology? Because believe it or not, even though we have some systems things get dropped into, I'm still doing most of my work in Word.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me. I moved in my role. I changed roles last year in the same firm, but different division, different team. So now I'm on a dedicated tech writing team, and I went from a DITA environment and Oxygen, which is a much better tool than XMetal, and you can fight me on that. And now I'm in Docs code, which is all markdown. I write in VS Code now. We're committing to GitLab, and our output is all digital. So, I mean, my output was digital prior to this, but we could talk about the markdown versus DITA, or structured authoring or non-structured authoring. Like I'm throwing that out there because that's
Why don't you
my experience.
explain what Markdown is?
Okay.
And how that works differently from DITA and XML.
Yeah. Okay. Well, to start with, if you don't know what DITA and XML is, it's usually it's a language similar to HTML, but it's a lot more granular. You can build languages around it, where HTML is kind of a standard structure. With XML, you have things, and DITA specifically, which I can speak to, has particular tags like metadata for the author. Hey, Harry's joining us. Did he pay us $12, Tim?
What's that?
Did he pay us $12 too, Tim?
He gets a child discount.
So anyhow, so XML will have you can have a task topic, and it'll say task at the beginning and the end of your opening and closing. And, then you have your steps inside a task topic, where a concept topic will have a different set of tags that you use and mark up. With Markdown, you don't have any of that. It's basically a blank slate. There's a very simple language. Headings are set by hashtags or pound signs. So your heading 1 is 1 pound sign, your heading 2 is 2 pound signs, and so forth, heading 1 through 5. It kind of aligns with the HTML spec. So you've got bullets, you've got numbers, and pretty much that's it. I mean, you have images and links and stuff like that, all the kind of basic stuff. And a lot of it that, what I miss about DITA and stuff like that is that there's a lot of better insertion of language and links and stuff like that. But I find it's just fast and quick and easy. And you can build templates around it, but it's not nearly as structured as XML. But the positive side to Docs code approach is that your developers can write content, and then you can kind of be gatekeepers or set the styles or set the templates. So that way, that's what our firm is doing, is all the developers, they write alongside us. Some of them we're doing all self-service, but some we are doing the uplift for them. So there's a mixed model that we have, but they do they like having the code and the docs in the same formats that they're familiar with, and in the same repo, SVN or GitLab repository that they're working with.
So when you use certain tools, like when you're working with DITA, my group uses Oxygen as the editor. It provides a mostly WYSIWYG kind of, not truly WYSIWYG, but a more editor-friendly type interface, so you don't have to deal with the tags. Do you have tools that do that for Markdown too?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about Markdown is you could do XML in any development environment. IntelliJ, VS Code, whatever. But it's best suited to dedicated tools like XMetal and Oxygen. Where Markdown, you could do it in just about any tool. We use VS Code. Some people do use IntelliJ, but they do have built-in previews. So while you're typing, you can have like a 2-pane thing where your left side is your content, and then the right side is the preview to see what it looks like. So there is preview in there, but it's not like, it's basic, but it works. Because you're really just dealing with basic tags, and it basically, the output eventually is this Markdown gets converted to HTML. So it approximates what your HTML page is going to look like. And there are tools built in, or what they're called extensions in VS Code, which are kind of like plugins that have all sorts of functionality. I'm playing with something called linters right now, which is you could get language linters, and we're implementing it as a kind of a living style guide, so people can write in the tool, see what, if they're using contractions when they shouldn't be, or vice versa, that kind of stuff. So, and that's you can actually put that linter into part of the pipeline in your version control system, and have that run before things are published, so people could correct things, and it goes through a set of your business rules essentially.
I have a question. And this would be more for the people who are actually using DITA and or Markdown. And I guess you could even talk about tools if you want, but what are the pluses and minuses with each of those environments? For those of us who had a situation at work that one of them might be able to solve, but haven't actually done production with any of them.
Well, does anyone have any experience with this stuff? Because I don't want to dominate the conversation, but does anyone have any thoughts? Okay. What I miss most about DITA is reuse, and the fact you could create little snippets. And for example, we were using snippets for some links, and it was great because, or a product name. So if a product name changes, and for some reason at Goldman, product names change all the freaking time, and team names change all the time. So we could change links, like if you moved from one system to Confluence, say, and you have that link in one place, and it's basically part of a library, and you could drag that into your content in DITA, and every time, like, you can basically update it once. So if you need to update the link, you update it once, and it gets populated every time you publish. Where that really doesn't exist in Markdown, and that's what I miss most, is that kind of reuse, and that kind of, it's a little bit more automated in that regard, especially with tools, the tools that are provided for DITA.
So Markdown doesn't have like the equivalent of variables, for example.
No, it doesn't. That's the thing. It really doesn't. It's basically, because it's basically the output is standard HTML and just straight HTML, that it's basically an accessible language, so anybody can really grasp and start writing quickly and easily. And I know even people are writing books in it and stuff like that, which, God, I wouldn't do worse. I couldn't imagine doing that, but there are people doing it for a variety of reasons. And there are other languages. There's not just Markdown. There's one called ASCII Doc, and there's one called Restructured Text, and they're all kind of very similar. But the firm and my team chose Markdown before I joined.
So why did they choose Markdown over something more structured like DITA?
Well, first of all,
if you already said that, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't actually. I didn't. It's and it was it's just a matter of scale, because we're supporting a division of 14,000, I think, and I think it's somewhere around there. And we're the developer relations team. So basically, the idea is to have as much self-service as possible, and they do that, not just in our documentation, but firm-wide. So there's that automation, and it just allows, we're not gatekeepers. We're not the people who are, we're doing a gatekeeping with business rules and stuff like that, but we're not part of that funnel where people can go and basically, in our self-service model, you can take our templates, take our processes, take our linters, our styles and stuff like that, and populate these templates. And we've kind of given you a guide on how to populate these templates for your product or whatever. So, it's just scalable. It's much scalable, because, if you've ever talked to a developer and you try to talk to them about XML, they kind of look at you funny. And especially if it's some language that they don't know, because there's a lot to it. And I'm sure if you've ever looked at DITA behind the scenes, the actual code behind it, it is pretty complex. So that simplicity and that scalability, I think, is really just was the reason why, because it was just a matter of scale. Like we're hiring writers, and if anyone wants to move to SLC, let me know. But you know, that was a decision because it's just a scaling thing.
So we were doing guides based out of Word of legacy documents from before we were acquired 15 years ago, and Oracle was making up its mind what tool we should use, and what their goal was to make accessible for people with vision disabilities type content. And the answer to that was not PDFs, because PDFs typically do not handle screen readers as well as HTML. So they wanted accessible HTML, which Microsoft Word does not do a great conversion of. So the solution was to move to a DITA type environment. And we, Oracle is incredibly huge, and they have different divisions, and there's no centralized documentation standard. So this person's organization uses this tool, this person's organization uses this tool. Well, we got thrown into the organization of all the acquisitions, and everyone used a different tool. So we didn't have like, oh, well, here's the standard for the company. The standard was generate output that met these criteria, but they didn't tell you how to get there. So we took 15 years to get there, although we only really worked on it for like 1 or 2 years. And the solution was to move to DITA using Oxygen as the editor. Before that, they had used Arbor Text. And the problem was, before that, we would have the developers collaborate on the content. So we would have the documents in source control, and we'd have a bug update this particular document. And the developers could check out the Word doc and make revisions in there, and then I could track the revision history and edit it and then publish it. We can't do that with the DITA because they didn't get Oxygen licenses. Everyone has Word at work, but Oxygen is prohibitively expensive. And so one of my guys is like, oh, I love XML. I live and breathe XML. And he took one look at that and said, I am not touching this. So we had to come up with a new way to handle it, which was I generated Word documents from the DITA, put them in a collaborative space like we had before. They made the edits, and then I'm talking, booger. It's a seed. Get out of here. And oh yeah, go get that. And so we went back to the old process, but instead of sourcing the Word document from Word, we sourced it from the DITA files. And so I am now double burdened, because I can't just approve the edits in Word. I have to then track those edits, go back into Oxygen, make them again, then regenerate the Word document and stick it back out for editing. But the output looks better. So that's the sideways step we took on collaboration with developers, because the Oxygen licenses are way too expensive to give out to everyone, and no one wants
Tim,
to learn how to use that.
What you're saying is that one of the disadvantages of DITA is you can't have collaborative editing in the same way you do if you just use Word.
Not with a WYSIWYG. I mean, if people were comfortable just with editing things in the base HTML, then it works great, because you can use a code review system to do a diff between the two, and it shows you where the text edits have been made. But if you want to actually edit it like a Word document where you can just type stuff in, you can't do that, because otherwise you're going to, I mean, if people just make edits, they're going to break the XML tags, and it's not going to be well rendered XML, and then I'm going to spend more time trying to clean up whatever it was they broke behind the scenes.
So it's interesting, even in our environment, it's just so simple now to have multiple people edit on a doc, and they can even work simultaneously in the same Word doc now, which is not as, which can also be negative, because you start you think, wow, that edit's no good, and you go crazy. So it takes, so it's not necessarily that good to be able to edit the same document at the same time, but yeah, it's all possible. And it sounds like DITA, you got this barrier, at least in your environment.
One of the things I was looking into in my prior role was Oxygen has a server-based tool, and I forget the name of it, but basically it'll give you a WYSIWYG, or you could send a link to it with your your subject matter experts or whomever you wanted to create the doc, and they would create it and it would kind of look like a Word kind of environment, but behind the scenes it was DITA. Now it sounds like in Tim's case, the cost would be too expensive because it's like a server-based thing, and I think it's per seat or something like that. But if there's something to look into, that if you're doing this round tripping kind of stuff, there are tools that are do to a conversion, because I think I know that Oxygen imports Markdown, and I think it does a decent Word conversion. So maybe that's something into export or import kind of thing.
We ended up just manually importing paragraph by paragraph into Oxygen. They offer one, but it lost too much. So it was going to be even more work to clean up what it imported than it would be just to say, I'm going to select these 3 paragraphs, copy, paste, make sure it looks good, then do the next 3 paragraphs and do that. Just because it's structured. So in Word, we might have heading 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. In Oxygen and Data, you don't have subheadings like that. You can have one topic with sections, but you can't nest them the way that you do in a Word document. So if you need to have a subsection, it's a separate topic, which you then in the book map nest as as an indented sublevel for that. So if you have heading 4s, you're going to have 4 topics that are all nested together in basically the table of contents to create the same output that you did in Word, because you just can't make one file and then break it into sections and have it be structured the same way in Data. Because Data is like, oh, one topic is one concept. And if you have a subheading, that's a different concept, even if it's a sub-concept. So they don't, you can put a section in there, but you can't put a section inside of a section inside of a section. It doesn't work that way, I don't think. So our guidance was recommended that we just create subtopics and nest them together in the map.
Yeah, that's one of the things I did like about Data is that, it's one topic, one thought kind of thing. So it helps you chunk content. I really like that concept of it. And also, that it's, that it's not nestable. Like you can, we've all seen pages that go on infinitely because people just decided to write and write and write everything in one Word doc or one topic. And you're just like, this should be like 15 topics. So that gives you that. And I also like that the structure is built in. So you don't have to think about it. I think it gives you a little bit more freedom and creativity to write because that structure is there and you already know how to do it. But, again, I think that it sounds like cost and adoption are really big barriers to Data, and that's what I experienced in the past, different places. But yeah, VS Code is free.
I've yet to work anywhere where they actually use Data correctly.
The only reason we did it my last role is because I was the one who was in charge of it.
Yeah.
They actually was a pretty easy sell because we were in RoboHelp and it was unstructured, and they had seen that it wasn't working. So to get to the structured language, and I think because it was only a team of 2 people, there wasn't a huge amount of cost. And because I wrote all the XSL when we had to customize stuff, it didn't come with any extra cost. So it was like, I think the initial license for Oxygen is like $500-600, and then maintenance is another couple $100 each year. So yeah, but I see, that's the thing I've always seen adoption, like XML. What are you talking about? That's like a 30-year-old technology, even though tons of things in the background are still XML, but it's that, that adoption and what do we do? And then the lack of support afterwards is the problem. So are you all still writing in Word and unstructured?
Oh, of course.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
At this point,
you can work in structured mode within Word. Just Word does not enforce it. You have to enforce it yourself.
Yeah.
But, I'm always working in a structured thought process because I started that way so long ago when we were building help and print from FrameMaker files.
See where I am there.
Everything structured.
Mark, you mentioned that in your environment, more than one person can edit a document at the same time. What is the environment, and how does the environment know which changes to save?
Just Word, SharePoint, and Outlook, and it basically, since autosave is on, it saves whatever's done last.
I know with our setup and
it'll save both persons' changes.
Yeah.
It can be interesting.
Yeah, I bet it is.
I know with our SharePoint, it's like basically you're in there, you can't get out. So, hey, it's Harry.
Harry is with us.
Harry lost a tooth. It's getting big. But anyway, what I was going to say with our group is they're still trying to kind of wrap their brains around structured authoring in the first place. Data, that's a whole different language literally to them. So we kind of write everything up, let's say in Word or in SharePoint or something like that first, but then we're working in essentially spreadsheets. It's not necessarily Excel, they're using Smart Sheets. So you can kind of rearrange rows a little bit, and that way it helps to figure out what part of not only the structure of what's being done, but we can still say, okay, this part of the project is going to be this section of structured authored stuff. And we're trying to combine between a self-service project, which is through ServiceNow. And I think they're going to be doing something with, they call it Ava, but it's essentially a virtual assistant too, which will point back to ServiceNow. So I think there's another, they're going to be shifting off of, what's it called, SharePoint into, what was it called? Because this is all HR stuff. It's something called Workday. So there's going to be a lot where it's just, again, it's all in spreadsheets more than anything for the topics. Like, here's your main category, here's a subcategory, here's the topic or the question, and here's the answer, and here's any related resources. So it's broken down the same way as DITA, but it's not, their brains are not there as it's actually DITA sort of thing. It's interesting.
I worked with accountants in my last role, and I got pages of content in Excel. I cried. Like, each tab was a new topic. I'm like, are you kidding me?
The financial world's horrible with that. I was the last two people I've been with.
I'm in the engineering division now, and I'm much happier. They're my people.
Yeah. For me, HR people are my people. So it's interesting.
So is anybody looking for new technology or thinking about moving from what you're doing? It sounds like everyone's kind of stuck with what they are.
You wonder what the next technology is going to be. Like, what's the next thing going to be?
Well, I mean, there's bots too to think about. Chat bots, and I think that's prime for TechCom because, you can write steps, like people want steps and a lot of things. Like, here's your guidance. Instead of going to a help page, you have your bot pop up, your chat bot, and say, what do you need help with? Like, it used to be kind of like Clippy, but a little bit more intelligent. You can make it more intelligent, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of sort of what we're trying to do at my job, is that, again, working within the HR department, or the people solutions operations, as they call it. I'm like, it's HR. It might be like anything from, I just had a new baby. What do I need to do to add them to my benefits? I just got divorced. How do I take off my ex-spouse from my benefits? I need a work visa. That's the topic that I've been working on lately, is immigration visas and things like this. So, I mean, the idea is that and then there's levels between employee and then what managers do versus what they call HR business partners do. So there's different audiences, there's different elements to everything. There's life events, there's just general compensation. There's so many moving parts. You don't think there are so many, but there really are. And I know they're trying to do it so that they use as much natural language. And part of it is we're using it too, because it's already been a soft launch for it, is finding where the gaps in our information is too. So if we're seeing a lot of people asking, like, for instance, when we have stuff about onboarding a contractor, but not offboarding a contractor. So suddenly we were getting this whole thing, like, how do I offboard a contractor? We had nothing up. So we had to kind of scramble and pull that information together. Fortunately, it was easy. But I mean, it's things like that. So it's kind of interesting how that works.
Yeah, the project I'm working on sounds kind of similar to what you're doing, Danielle. Like, we haven't had any technical communicators in our group thus far. I started 6 months ago, so we're kind of building things from scratch, but we have pieces in Confluence, pieces in SharePoint, pieces on the internet, like scattered all over, and no two teams really had a standard of where they created documents, how they created documents, and how they shared them. So trying
you're just trying to pull it all together in one spot. Yeah, exactly.
Confluence is the worst.
Yeah, it's just
it's horrible.
Limited.
Awful.
And getting content out of it is just horrible. Like, we have to, because all the teams have their documentation and stuff in Confluence, basically. So, we're doing, there's a free open source tool called Pandoc, PANDOC, and it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife of conversion tools. It'll convert Word to Markdown. It doesn't do DITA, but it does do DocBook, which is another flavor of XML, and it does a lot of cool conversion stuff. It's a command line tool. It's free, and it actually works pretty well. But what I did, because of Confluence, I actually wrote a little PowerShell script in Windows that gives me a little pre-processing of the HTML that comes out of Confluence, and some post-processing to get it when it gets converted to Markdown, to do some cleanup there, and that way it saves some time for the writers. So that's another thing to think about too, is how can you automate little things that you have going now. So basically, as Tim talked about, a DITA map, which is basically the table of contents of basically your table of contents of your work. we were using a static site generator called mkdocs to preview our stuff as a doc set, and I'm creating now. It's called, the mkdocs YAML file is basically that TOC. So I'm looking at how to programmatically build that TOC from our file structure now, so that way it takes a lot of time for writers manually to put these things in and type it in. It's a lot of keying, so we're hoping to automate as much as possible in that process, and send it out to our users, or our self-service people too.
What do you think is the appeal of Confluence? I mean, so many people adopting it, and I like you said, it's just messy.
It's got a GUI and anyone can access it. That's the thing, and
it's an easy to use wiki that people can simply collaborate with.
And probably lots of firms already had it. So
yeah, we have it, and it integrates with Jira as well, which
right,
is what
I know about the Jira
started using. So it's really easy to say, oh, we're doing this, and it's tied to this Jira ticket, and then boom, there's a link right there and explains the ticket. It was better. Okay, I'm talking. It was way better
about
than
concepts.
No.
I thought he said concept.
We had this weird wiki that was called Beehive that I think Oracle had made like a decade ago, and we were forced to use that, and it was very clunky. And they just decided, oh, no, we're using Confluence, and you have a year to copy and paste manually. No actual update or integration. Just manually go through all your content, copy and paste it to Confluence.
We have a homegrown wiki inside the firm that's been going for 18 years.
Someone
now,
wants to play with me.
and it's terrible. So we've got to get content out of that too. So it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the newer tools that are coming out, or newer features that people are looking for these days? I think because content, it doesn't change, but it does. I guess it's in how it's delivered changes, and how people absorb it changes over time. So what do you think are some trends that way? I mean, like for us, like you said, the bots. Like I said, at my company, they're really trying to push for the self-service, so that way they can reduce the calls over at their call center and things like that. But they're not new issues; they're just new approaches in that respect. Does anyone see any trends or things that they're seeing that they're like, okay, well, old problem, different approach, or new approach with stuff like bots is one thing, but bots have been around for a little bit. Is there like a different angle that people are looking at things right now?
I mean, the output tool I've seen use, there's a generation called static site generators, which I alluded to earlier. Gatsby is a really famous one. One's called Hugo, and I think that's created by Google. mkdocs is one. There's a bunch of other ones, and basically, and this is something that Tom Johnson, if you know Tom Johnson, if you don't know Tom Johnson, you need to go to I'dRatherBeWriting.com. But this is his area with all that emerging stuff, because he's doing this kind of stuff too. And I think he put his whole entire website as a static site generator instead of like a blog like WordPress or something like that. And like I said, in our case, we're using it to do desktop previews of the whole doc set to make sure links work and stuff like that, and everything looks good, as a QA step before it goes out into our production environment, which for the time being, I think is also going to be a static site generator. But what's cool, and another thing, it's another free tool. And I guess if you've been in it as long as I have, it's kind of like the old Chum files, where it's like this generated on help piece that's on your desktop or on a website. But less, it's basically with Markdown or an unstructured language. I'm sure you can get other languages in there, and then it gets pulled from your GitLab repository, and it displays it as a website. And I know lots of companies are using that. I know Microsoft and Adobe are all using Markdown for their tool, for their documentation. I don't know what their output is. But yeah, I think that's a thing, because it's zero cost and it's easy to customize, especially if you have a developer that you can access. So that way your tool chain is kind of Markdown, Jira or GitLab. Jira and or GitLab out to the static site generator, and that's kind of easily distributable. And if it's part of your kind of pipeline, like anytime you make a commit to your master branch or your main branch, it regenerates the site automatically. So any changes are just reflected, instantaneously almost. So I think that's a way to go too.
Sure.
Instead of the cost of different servers.
Yeah. How about the type of content? I mean, a while ago, it was that social media is going to be everything, and now we've discovered, no, it's not necessarily the case. And the whole idea of expanding on the internet and things like this was like, oh, now we can do video, and now we can do multimedia and blah, 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 interactive stuff. of course, this has been said for many years. Does anyone see more of that actually happening, or are we kind of reverting back to no, just text and pictures is good? I kind of see a little bit of both, because in some cases, video is great if you need to be demonstrating something, but sometimes it's like we don't need all that flash. It's kind of like the idea of we have a conference call where we could have had just an email kind of a thing, going back to the basics, sort of thing. So does anyone see that happening with just the content itself? I mean, where I am, like they still PDF everything to death, and it drives me crazy. And part of it is that we're trying to design things where, as I mentioned, we have this ServiceNow self-service thing, database, knowledge base, whatever you want to call it. And we're trying to use SharePoint as just like a launching point, but then everybody wants to put everything on the launching point instead. Or like, no, the details should be over here. So there's like PDFs of FAQs. And they could be pages and pages and pages, and it can just go so deep. And I understand why it has to go deep, but I'm constantly saying, no, that stuff should, if it's really that important, should be right there on the front page. We shouldn't be burying it on a PDF someplace, and, just kind of incorporating some of those UX practices that are going on. But there's some things that people are like, no, we need a video. Like, why? Or we need an audio something, or why? So I didn't know if anybody else sees that with what they're doing, or maybe what you guys are doing is a lot more basic than what I have to do.
I mean,
as far as instructional.
Like what I'm working on, I feel like there's cases where like a 2-minute video would cover something a lot better than a 20-page document, but
that's true.
I don't have the resources to create a video very easily on my work computer. I could do one in 10 minutes on my home computer, but I don't have the processing power or the applications I need to produce a video that would be decent. So I tend not to do it for my work projects.
That makes sense. I'm that way too. Part of it might be resources, like you said. It's not that we can't do it, it's we don't have, they're not going to spend the money to do it, or something like that. They're not going to give us the tools to do it. Even if you offer cheap tools, that's what always gets me. I'm like, no, I don't need this fancy version of this. If I have this other version, I can work with that. But
you still have to jump through the hoops to get it.
Yeah. Or I sometimes look at things and say, they're making it more complicated than it has to be, or something like that. So. Yeah.
Well, the other thing you run into on that is siloing, where different departments very much have their own, and God forbid you start doing things or having opinions about that stuff.
Yeah. I had a project recently where it was all about the hiring process from the moment a manager says, I need help, to the point that welcome to your first day and all the steps in between. And fortunately, another group had started it, but it was something where we had to get the recruiting people, the people who actually do the onboarding or pre-boarding, and then the people who actually like get you started. So it would be, and then there was the difference between whether you're being hired as an employee versus being hired as a contractor, and the different processes you had to do, and how, especially with pandemic times, how do you get your equipment shipped to you, and how do you get access, and things like this. And it was, each group had kind of their own way of doing it, and they had to say, okay, well, you're saying it's done this way, but you're saying the same thing is done a different way. Which is the actual truth? What's the one truth there? So sometimes they have to have their silos, but I think it's just like bringing down the walls from like 6 foot down to 3 foot, so at least they can talk to each other. That's kind of tricky in itself.
Fiefdoms are a thing in big companies. Believe me, we also had this proprietary markup language that they wrote 25 years ago.
Oh,
and
geez.
we were talking to the team about getting that content into something that the rest of the world can use. And the MD, who's the important person up here, was like questioning our choice of markdown, and why weren't we using this, or why aren't we doing that, and stuff like that. So that politics is real, and it's crazy. Video, I think, is expensive in terms of time.
Time consuming too.
I mean, trust me, writing, audio editing an hour-long podcast takes me a couple of hours and a couple of run-throughs. So, and I do that for $0 because I love doing it. but it is, it's a cost, and there are tools, I mean, I have Adobe Audition, which is part of the Creative Suite, which is a subscription model. So,
Right.
that's like $50, $60 a month, I think. So,
Right.
a lot of companies aren't going to give that to a tech writer or instruct them how to use it. It's kind of like, here you go, figure it out.
Right.
And I did a 5-minute video years ago of a friend of mine. It was a cooking thing, that concept we were coming up with, and we had hours and hours of video, and it took me a real long time to get it down to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's fun, but it's tedious, especially if you don't know what
Yeah,
you're
it
doing.
is.
And there's a learning curve, let me tell you.
Oh, it is. I think I figured it out on Camtasia, which is definitely more affordable than the Adobe option. It's easier to adopt it because they have really good tutorials and stuff. But yeah, it's definitely time consuming, even just to come up with like a 5 or 10 minute video and edit it so it looks smooth and professional. It's tricky.
Yeah.
That's
And
why
obviously,
there's a question about, how people are using content. What were you going to say, Vicki?
So I have lots of experience making videos and having nobody watch them. I previous couple jobs ago did a lot of videos. My company was really into it. They thought they were really sexy. So I made a whole lot of videos, and we found that people would watch the first 3 and they would only watch the first 2 minutes of the first 3. And so you're talking about a 5 or 10 minute video is like, no, don't do it. The other thing that I knew from having done so many is 2-minute video takes 10 hours to process. So start to finish.
I remember you teaching me some of that stuff a couple of years ago. And eat salty things before you record. I remember that too.
No.
Yes. Makes your voice
We're about
good.
2 minutes out, folks. So we should
Okay,
probably start
Vicki,
wrapping up.
when you did those videos, did they improve customer engagement, customer satisfaction? I mean, once you started doing the 2-minute ones as opposed to the 5-minute, I mean, because that's the ROI.
Right, because they'd watch the first 3. They were instructed to watch the first 3. We had an audience that we knew who they were because we were selling to a middleman, right? And we knew who our dealers were. And so it wasn't like we were selling to a homeowner or end consumer. And they were instructed to watch them, and they would watch the first 3. So I'm not sure of the ROI on that. I just know we stopped making videos and we didn't get a big increase in customer support calls.
There you go.
Interesting.
Nice victory there. We have to remember to celebrate the victories more. I think
That's right.
as a whole. So we just had our first product land, and I was the one to land it. So on time, thank God. Took only one 11-hour day, but I got it done. So
Yeah,
well, folks,
that's going back to the keynote, Ed, about the positivity and
yeah.
Right.
We're just about out of time. I mean, if you guys want to hang out a little bit, I'll keep this breakout room open a little bit longer.
I think it automatically shuts off. After,
it does. Okay, well then I'm a liar. I've never done this before with a breakout room. So, but it's great. I thought the conversation was really good. I hope I didn't just dominate, but I hope you all learned something from our little chat. It was nice to meet some of you, and it's great to see a lot of you that I already know. So
yeah.
Hey there, Dave Pierce. What's happening?
Oh yeah, it's closing in 1 minute, 55 seconds.
There you go. All right, cool. And then we'll have another breakout, and during that time, we'll have the next set of elections. Hopefully, Jen will have figured out the multiple choice thing, because it worked the other night. Talk about emerging technologies and all this conference stuff. So we had it working perfectly on Wednesday when we did like a dress rehearsal with a bunch of us, and suddenly it's like, oh great, everything's crashing. It's always how it works. It's kind of glad that my topic wasn't picked for this, because I took what we saw. I came in here late. My computer crashed. Like, oh, good.
All right, all 15
aren't we
seconds.
Going to eventually get to all 9 topics that are there?
No, we're not.
No. Okay.